Welcome back to the continuation of my Skeeride 2 build. Today I've got the Gemini Skid. This is an awesome skid. It's been proven, it's been tested. If you're going to do a Skeeride 2, this is the skid to do. One of the first things I'm going to do is install my tensioner to my M3 rod. So what I do want to do is measure the depth of this tensioner. This is just a 2.5 millimeter drill bit. So that's how deep that goes. And then what I can do is I'm just going to mark it right there. And then essentially what I can do is look at this and I can see how deep that needs to go in. If I go much deeper or much further, what will happen is it will start to pop out the back of your tensioner. So I've marked it right here on my threaded rod. I'm going to put a little bit of tape right there. And then I can start threading that in on my tensioner. As it starts to get to where it's going to seat, you'll feel it get a little snug. That's great. Yep, I can feel it right there. It's bottomed out on my tape. And I can feel it starting to get pretty tight on there. So now I can pull my tape off. Made a bit of a mess holding onto it with my pliers. There we go. Okay, once I've got that done, I'm going to start from the back of the skid and I'm going to work my way forward. So I went to add my 3x8x3 bearings to my wheels here, and they wouldn't go in. It was too tight on this back side of the wheel. So I ended up printing some new wheels. I printed them at 100.5%, and the bearing went in really nice on that one. So we'll try it on this one. Yep. That pops in great. That's much better. I've gone with lock nut screws on my tensioner, and for my screws here, I've gone with 35 millimeters. The guide from Gemini says to use 30 millimeters, but I was having a little bit of an issue with the length, and so I've gone with 35. And I have the plastic spacer and a washer, and then here I've got a little metal washer as well. Great, that's gonna work. I think that's gonna work out really well with that 35 millimeter. And still allow just a little bit of space here so that the other side screw is not touching. So again, 35 millimeters. We've got our wheel with our bearings in it. I am going to do a washer. And then I'm going to do a washer, the plastic spacer, and then I'm going to take a little bit of this Lucas oil red and tacky, just a little, and just spin that into there. And then we'll get it into our rail, and then we will screw it in. I have the tension beam too that has the hole in it right here. make sure you take your 3mm bit and just make sure that that hole is clean. You want this to slide freely. And if you look here on the inside of the Gemini Skid, you'll see a recessed spot right there. That is where this is going to sit and line up. And then we're going to use a 16mm screw. We got the tensioner knob. I've put an M3 nut in there. And I'm going to screw it on to our threaded rod. This is just a M3 screw. It is not a lock nut. Now I've got the tension beam 1. Take your 3mm bit and just clean that up. Make sure that it's nice and smooth inside. These are also 16mm screws. Again, not going to go all the way in, so that I can keep that skid with a little flexibility. Then we can snug it up later. There you go. You can see that this tensioner slides forward or it goes back to adjust the tension on your track. So now I'm going to install my lower scissor, and here I've got my upper scissor, and you can see that there's like a groove or a notch, and here there's a groove or a notch. They're going to rest into each other like this. An easy way to remember is that it was on your build plate down like this, and it's also going to be installed like this. So we're going to do that with 20mm screws. Again, leave it a little loose, and you can come back later and snug everything up. And because the scissor rotates, you don't want it to be very tight anyway, or too tight at least. Before I install the 16mm screws into this lower scissor, I'm going to use my 3mm drill bit and open those holes just a little bit. This is my upper scissor V2. You'll notice the difference. It has this cross brace between the shock mounts, and we're going to put 16mm screws right there to hold that. I've snugged that up. You can see it doesn't want to move. So now what I'll do is back it off, maybe like one whole turn. Awesome. I have the Gemini Skid brace. So up against this part of the rail right here is where you'll see that there's a bit of a recessed area at the top of this side support, and it's going to go up against that. If you don't get it up against that, then it won't sit flush against this part of the rail. After you print it and you stick it in, you'll see what I mean. If you stick it in wrong, you'll also see what I mean. So we're going to put that side support in with M2 by 12 screws. Make sure that that's cleaned up so that the front arm can pivot easily. This front arm takes 20mm screws. This spacer is going to go into this little groove right here. It fits in there nicely. If it doesn't, you can take a X-Acto knife and trim it a little bit. And then we're going to put a 12mm screw And then on this other side, so we're going to take the same thing. There's a little notch here. It's going to fit into there nicely. And then this other side is a 35mm screw. Okay, and when you start to feel that screw come through, you're going to stop. Hey, what's that sound? It's the sound of a shock getting installed on the skid. So I've got a 70mm shock here. Again, it's another one of those inexpensive ones from Amazon. It does have 40 weight oil in it. And then we're gonna get that shock in there. Just make sure that it's lined up. So there's our front spacers with our shock. So with the cross beam set in those notches, I can now take 20mm screws and run them through. At this point, I can also put on my upper idlers, which carry a 8x12 by 3.5 inch bearing. Before you put your second idler wheel on, you want to install your rear 80mm shock. This is a 20mm screw. And now I can put my upper idler wheel on and my spacer with the little flange pointing toward the wheel. So I didn't install this 20mm shock on the front arm. And you're going to want to do that before you put the front arm on. Now I can take a 20mm screw and install this front shock right here. Shock's installed. I am now ready to do my limit strap. I have made a video about this before, but if you want to see how to do that here, we'll go ahead and do it here too. So I always like to cut out, if I can, the words on the belt, but I'm just going to snip it like this. And we're going to have one end around the top of that bar and then one around that crossbar. You can see here that I have the belt, the ends almost touch when they loop around like that. And then what I can do is it allows me to keep this writing up at the top so that it's basically hidden from view and it's not as visible. And I can install it like that. Marked it with my thumb of where it's going to be. So I'll slide that into my punch. Perfect hole. Washer. So I've got an M2x5 screw, running it through. There it is on the other side. It's probably easier if I get it out of the way. So now I can put my washer on there. And then lastly is my nut. So a very, very small amount of blue thread lock, just so that the nut doesn't pop off. You can run 2 nuts, 2 screws through these limit straps, but I almost find it better and easier. You can tighten it. You can see if I pinch that just a little bit, you can get a small zip tie and just pinch it right there. So if you do want a little tighter, you can do that. So this shock is 70, so I'm going to pull this strap so it's just barely pulling on the shock. And then I've just counted 6 teeth up from the end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's where I need to punch that one. So M2x5. Washer. Through the belt. The teeth line up. Our washer on there. Very small amount of blue Loctite. And the nut. And there we have our limit strap ready to go. And like I said, if you do want it to be a little tighter, if you're popping too many wheelies, then you can put a small zip tie on there. So the last thing to do, I've got everything installed, is to just snug up all of my screws, especially on these cross braces where I don't want anything coming loose. Now, obviously you don't want to snug up the screws that are attached to these arms that are going to pivot. That could be an issue, as it will stop them from pivoting. But all of these cross braces can get snugged up. And there we go. We have our Gemini Skid for our free ride Ski-Doo ready to go.